Okay, so you asked me about the meaning of life, right?
Yes.
There's an
Yes.
important distinction to be made between meaning of life and meaning in life. If we talk about the meaning of life, we're talking about something that I think we cannot really know. We're assuming that there is some kind of purpose to our existence, and we want to know what that purpose is. And in order for that to make sense, we need to assume that there is a God or some kind of planning, some kind of intention to our existence. And that only makes sense if there is a God. Now, if we want to assume that there is a God who has a plan, who brought us here, who created us for a particular purpose, then of course there's the question, how do we know what God's plans are, right? How do we know what God's purpose is? That is one question. It seems to me that we cannot really know that. Second, even if we know that, I'm not convinced that it would help us to find meaning in life, you know? So for instance, we could imagine, first of all, we could imagine a God who has created us for a particular purpose. For instance, he could want to amuse himself seeing us suffering, right? Just as a possibility. Now that would be a purpose. Let's say we found this purpose. We know that's what we are here for, but that wouldn't probably make our life more meaningful. We wouldn't feel better about ourselves if that is the purpose of our lives. Now say this is not such a terrible purpose, but there's something else, like we're here in order to glorify God and his creation. Even then, this would not necessarily make our life more meaningful. We would have a purpose, right? But perhaps we're not happy with that purpose. Perhaps we want to do something else with our lives. So as long as this is somebody else's plan, even if that somebody else is God, it doesn't necessarily make our life, experientially speaking, that is from our experience, more meaningful. That is why I said you need to distinguish between meaning of life and meaning in life. Now, meaning in life, that is the question. What makes our lives meaningful, right? A particular life. And there's a lot of discussion about that, and most philosophers think that we need to connect to something that is objectively valuable. For instance, engage with great art, or be a very moral person, or do something that realizes objectively existent values. And that is supposed to explain why we don't find the life meaningful of someone who spends their life, say, I don't know, watching daytime television all day and seem to be perfectly happy with it. Most people would say, well, that is not really a meaningful life, right? But the problem about this connection to objective values is, of course, that it's difficult to see what makes a value objective. How do we get to the objectivity of those values, right? Because in order to find something valuable, we first need to value it ourselves. It doesn't make any sense to say, this is objectively valuable, but I and nobody else values it. So if there's no valuing, then there cannot really be a value. Does that make sense? Do you understand where I'm going with this?
Yes.
And so the point I'm trying to make here, it seems to me that meaning in life should be understood more democratically, in a more open way, taking into account the various different preferences and lifestyles people have. So what makes life meaningful for me is not necessarily what makes life meaningful for you. Can be different things. And it doesn't have to be a grand purpose. We don't have to be Picassos or Einsteins or Mother Teresa's in order to have a meaningful life. So everyone can have a meaningful life if they have, I don't know, if they have love, friendship, passion, things to care about. These things matter, you know.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. Okay, we can go to the next question. Can we go to the next
sure.
question? Yes, thank you. Okay, the next question is about this and its meaning, its teaching for our life, for our living. We have, I think, we have always educated on various kinds of experience, education, learning, but in none of us, in none of them, this was included. Whereas thinking of this itself can have some beneficial and worthy aspects for life itself. I believe that thinking deep of this can be a start of life itself. What is your opinion in this case?
I'm not entirely sure whether I've understood the question correctly, but I can say this. There is a common view, widespread view, that death is the greatest evil. Right? There cannot be a greater evil than death. And from that, it would follow that we have to try to prevent death as much as we can. So it's the highest priority we have. And not only with respect to our common ordinary lifespan, that is, try to prevent people from dying before their time, before their natural lifespan ends, but if possible, to get rid of mortality altogether. Right? That is the transhumanist goal, to overcome the human condition. And one important aspect of that is to extend our lifespans indefinitely. So find out what makes us age, and then do something about it so we don't have to age anymore. We can stay forever young. And we will probably die at some stage, because you can't, you will still be vulnerable to accidents and things like that, but you won't have to die anymore. And those who argue that we should make this a priority and use modern technology, already existing technologies, and hopefully soon to be developed technologies, to combat aging and death. Those think also that our life is not really meaningful before we have achieved that, before we can live on indefinitely. And the reason for that is that they argue that there's so many things we might want to do that we cannot do because we have to die. So we have, if we had an indefinite lifespan, we could fulfill all those plans, and that would make our life meaningful. But it seems to me that if our life cannot be meaningful as it is now, with our current limited lifespan, with our current, whatever it is, 70, 80 years, right? Then an eternal life or an indefinitely extended life wouldn't be any more meaningful. If this life cannot be meaningful, why should a 300-year span life be more meaningful, or 1,000 years? So that doesn't make much sense to me. And it would also have the implication that no one has ever lived a meaningful life. If death, mortality stands in the way of meaning, then no one who has ever lived a meaningful life. This seems to me counterintuitive. So to answer your question, I think that our mortality doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we have a meaningful life.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Okay. Do you think that post-humanism will be a successful project?
I beg your pardon, say again, please.
Do you think that post-humanism project will be successful in its goals?
We're talking about transhumanism here, not post-humanism. The term post-humanism normally refers to a different kind of theory. It's a project of people who want to overcome humanism as a particular perspective on the world where humans stand in a center, right? So post-humanists try to overcome humanism, whereas transhumanists aim to overcome humanity, become better than merely human. Now your question is, do I think that this is going to be successful, that we will overcome our humanity? I don't know. I think that many of the expectations are overblown. I don't think if it's going to happen, it is not going to happen anytime soon. But on the other hand, of course, we develop. That is, we are in a process of evolution constantly. And there's no saying what will happen and how we will develop in the next, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000 years. But I don't think that within a few decades, which is the common prognosis, we will no longer be human. We will be something else. We will have merged with the machines or something like that. I don't think that is going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. We can go to the third question. And it is my favorite question because it's about the difference between sex and gender. I don't know from which time sociologists and anthropologists came to this new notion and prefer to recognize from the difference between them. But now I can see mainstream from a mainstream in non-binary gender identity or sexual identity, I don't know, which wasn't convenient in the decades before. But so I ask you to explain it more for us, the difference between sex and gender for us now, please.
Okay. Well, the distinction between sex and gender is pretty old, at least 7 decades. And you could say, and the terminology is not generally accepted. So different philosophers and thinkers use the term sex and gender in different ways. But the most common distinction is sex is our natural biological distinction, meaning sex describes being biologically female or biologically male. But if that were all, if there were nothing but sex, those biological distinctions, then it wouldn't make much sense what we often say, like, for instance, you should act like a man, right? To people, if a man doesn't behave like a man, we might say, act like a man, or act like a woman. You're not a real woman, you're not a real man. And what does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? And what we mean is that we have certain standards, ideals, stereotypes, if you will, about how a man or a woman should behave, should act, should be. And this social construct of man and woman, this is gender. So certain characteristics, certain attributes that we commonly associate with being a man or being a woman. But of course, someone who has a female sex can have traits and attributes that are commonly associated with men and the other way around. Right? But now an interesting development has taken place recently, namely the transgender movement. And so trans activists try to convince people that sex is nothing biological. There is no such thing as sex. Meaning that biology doesn't have any importance whatsoever. You are a man not because you have certain physical attributes. You are a man because you identify as a man. Likewise, you are not a woman because you have certain physical attributes. You are a woman because you identify as a woman. Which means that if you have the body of a man, you can still be a woman if you identify as a woman. But the question is, of course, for me, what does it actually mean to identify as a woman? And why would identifying as a woman make you a woman? So you might say, well, if I identify a woman as a woman, the reason for that is that I feel like a woman inside, right? I'm a man on the outside, but on the inside, I feel like a woman. But for me, this raises the question, how do I know what it feels like to be a woman? Is there anything in particular that it feels like to be a woman? Do all women feel alike? Which for me is very implausible. So it seems to me that there is most likely no such thing as feeling like a woman, right? I'm feeling like me and you're feeling like you, and perhaps we have certain characteristics that are more commonly found in women or more commonly found in men, but still feeling like a woman, there's no such thing. So that leaves me baffled about the claim that a man makes, a biological male makes, saying that he is in fact a woman. And the same, you mentioned non-binary people, right? Non-binary people would say, I'm neither a man nor a woman. And again, I'm not sure, I cannot get my head around what that means. Again, a man, I could say this, right? As a biological male, I could say, I declare myself to be non-binary now. That is, I don't want to be identified either as a man or as a woman. So call me they. Or you could say the same. But our biology doesn't change. Physically, we will remain exactly the same. Nothing changes there. So now we're non-binary. We are neither male nor female. But what does that mean to be neither or both? It seems to me that these are physical attributes. Sex is a physical attribute. So to break away from that and somehow use sex as an attitude of the mind, that doesn't make much sense. And interestingly, I mean, the comparable case would be a white person self-identifies as black. Does it make sense? Not really, because if you're white, you're white, right? So self-identifying as black doesn't seem to make much sense. But it doesn't make less sense than if a man self-identifies as a woman. Now, interestingly, these cases are regarded very differently, are assessed very differently. A white person who identifies as black is not accepted. right? This is not accepted. You cannot do that. But if you're a woman and want to self-identify as a man, that is okay. And in fact, we all have to respect it. And this different treatment of those very similar cases is quite confusing.
Okay, so you see this occasion very complex and confusing, yes? Thank you very much, Professor.
You're very welcome.
For the next session, what?
That was it? We're done?
Thank you very much. It was very short. It was very short interview, but it was useful very much. I will write down the conversation and will back to you. I think we can have more sessions with each other. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you.
Goodbye,
Bye.
Professor.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.